belong to Jim, and I'm passing them to Alina.
Well, that is
And
wonderful.
she said she would be honored to have his hymnals. So there's 2 hymnals. See, James Jr.
Mike starts at 6. 6:30. Good morning. Welcome to Kitsap Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. Please rise and body your spirit to join in singing our call to worship, Morning Has Broken, number 38 in the Gray Hymnal. Praise whoever you are and wherever you come from, for this hour, once again, welcome to the Kitsap Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. We're so glad to be together, this loving, vibrant community. Whoever you are and wherever you come from, for this hour, we here are one gathered congregation, and all are welcome. My name is Ed Luby, and in the spirit of KUUF mission and part of our ever-growing welcome, I offer you this self-description. I'm a middle-aged, pasty white fella. I've got short-cut hair on the side, and I'm reasonably clean-shaven. I'm wearing a bright blue shirt with red and silvery squiggled tie. I've got a phone in my pocket that I need to remove. Balding a little bit on top. Been here for about 5 years, not this particular day, but I've been with this church for about 5 years now. Recently off the board, which allows me to announce your new president and vice president of the board, Ms. Beth Wilson and Ruth Powers Piccone. Yes. And with the extra addition of our new board member as well, Lenny Barone, I think that you have a great leadership going forward. Our worship leader this morning is Reverend Carol McKinley, who comes to us from the Olympia Unitarian Universalist Congregation, where she serves as a community minister. Reverend McKinley has been a wonderful and trusted partner to our church over the years. I'd like to welcome any visitors. If you're here in person, we all look forward to welcoming you outside after the service. I invite you to follow along in the order of service. For those of you attending virtually, the links for this service, including the order of service, are on our website and in this morning's worship service email. If you're here in the sanctuary this morning, please silence all of your electronic devices. The announcements are available on our website, www.kuuf.org, or in our weekly newsletter, The Candle. Our one major announcement will be made after the service today. We acknowledge that the land on which it doesn't have an introduction to that. I love these birds in the background. That's awesome. We acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the Aboriginal territory of the Suquamish people. Expert fishermen, canoe builders, and basket weavers, the Suquamish live in harmony with the lands and waterways along Washington's Central Salish Sea, as they have for thousands of years. Here the Suquamish live and protect the land and waters of their ancestors for future generations, as promised by the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. Reverend Carol McKinley will deliver our opening words.
Good morning, I'm Carol McKinley, and I have white hair. I'm wearing a white top, and I'm wearing one of my favorite stoles, which has all beautiful scenes of the Pacific Northwest, including dogwood and other natural items here in our area. So once again, it's a pleasure to be with you on this beautiful day. And our opening words are by the poet Mary Oliver. She writes, "You can die for it, an idea or the world. People have done so brilliantly, letting their small bodies be bound to the stake, creating an unforgettable fury of light. But this morning, climbing the familiar hills and the familiar fabric of dawn, I thought of China and India and Europe, and I thought how the sun blazes for everyone, just so joyfully as it rises under the lashes of my own eyes. And I thought, I am so many. What is my name? What is the name of the deep breath I would take over and over again for all of us? Call it whatever you want. It is happiness. It is another one of the ways to enter the fire. Good morning. Once again, it is good to be together.
Now we'd like to welcome Tricia Bishop up to light our chalice today. Here she comes. Tricia has been attending KUUF for about a year. She moved to Port Orchard from Idaho, where she worked in juvenile corrections. She grew up in Washington and is happy to be home. Join me now in lighting our chalice. If you have your own chalice or candle at home, please light it as I read our chalice lighting words by the Sufi mystic Rumi. Love is not written on paper, for paper can be erased. Nor is it etched on stone, for stone can be broken. But it is inscribed on a heart, and there it shall remain forever. Thank you. Before I move further, do we have any mothers in the room? Could you all raise your hand, moms? Thank you. Happy Mother's Day. Please join me in the spoken affirmation. The words will appear on the screen. We gather as a caring community seeking life's deeper meanings. We value diversity and affirm the worth of all living things. We strive to speak truth in love, to act for justice, to grow in spirit, and to care for the earth. We celebrate with open hearts and minds the creative power that sustains and transforms us. Our next hymn, number 1010 in the Teal hymnal, We Give Thanks, was written by a Canadian, Wendy Luella Perkins, who resides in Kingston, Ontario. From her website, we learned that she was ordained as a UU minister in 1999, and she has committed her life to spiritual deepening, community building, and progressive social change. While she spent several years in congregational and denominational ministry, her vocation is now lived out mostly in the community, focusing on food and music. She is a local food and farm activist with the National Farmers Union Local number 316 and loves to cook for friends with fresh food straight from the garden and farm. For about 10 years, she has also facilitated meditative singing groups called Soulful Singing around Kingston and across the country that creates spontaneous, joyful circles of song. Please rise in body or in spirit to join in singing hymn number 1010 in our Teal hymnal, Singing the Journey. We will sing through this 3 times.
For the
Melinda Hughes, our Director of Religious Education, will share our time for all ages.
Good morning, everyone. So good to be here this morning. Before I start our story, I just want to share just a smidge about our religious education program. So earlier this year, since COVID started, we've been using a program called Spirit Play, which is Montessori-based and story-based. And in the month of May, we've switched to a program called Soul Matters, which is a thematic approach to the month. So I just wanted to share with you for May what things, it was about creativity. So last week we talked about how creativity helps us solve puzzles. Today it's about how creativity helps include everyone. Next week it's how creativity helps us practice originality. And at the end of the month, the last weekend in May, it's music's creativity helps us in so many ways. So I just wanted to share a little bit, because one of the challenges is matching what is going on down here in the sanctuary with what is happening up on the hill. And a lot of times the stories in the sanctuary have to do with what the adults are talking about, and then the children go up the hill and we do something totally different. And so I was thrilled that this morning, the story that matches the creativity helps include everyone also matched with Reverend Carol's sermon. So you get to hear the story that the children would be hearing up the hill, but they're going to hear it in here this morning. So today's story is called The Year We Learned to Fly, and it was inspired by the American Black folktale, The People Could Fly, which was created into a story by Virginia Hamilton years ago. This story was written by Jacqueline Woodson. That was the year we learned to fly. That was the spring, when the rain seemed like it would never stop and the thunder boomed so hard we weren't allowed to go outside. Use those beautiful and brilliant minds of yours, my grandmother said. Lift your arms. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and believe in a thing. Somebody, somewhere, at some point, was just as bored as you are now. So my brother and I closed our eyes, and for a few minutes that first day, we weren't stuck in our apartment anymore. We were flying over the city we'd known our whole lives, but it was suddenly different, exploding with every kind of flower we'd ever dreamed of growing. That was the summer we learned to fly, when my brother and I couldn't stop fussing with each other over whose turn it was to wash the windows, to feed the dog, to clean the kitchen. We fought and frowned and made silent promises to never speak to each other again. My grandmother said, lift your arms, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and stop being so mean about everything. Somebody, somewhere, at some point, was just as mad as you are now. So we did. And as the soft wind took us out over the city and past the windows of kids who hadn't yet learned to fly, my brother and I reached for each other's hand, flying and diving and laughing and leaving all of our mad far behind us. There was the autumn, our rooms felt too big and lonely, with only us in them and the darkness coming on so fast. But while we hugged ourselves against the too quiet of it all, we remembered that we didn't have to be stuck anywhere anymore. My grandmother had learned to fly from the people who came before. They were aunts and uncles and cousins who were brought here on huge ships, their wrists and ankles cuffed in iron. But my grandmother said, nobody can ever cuff your beautiful and brilliant mind. So our people learned to fly, she said. They dreamed a thing and made it happen. They closed their eyes and flew away home. Lift your arms, my grandmother said. Close your eyes and remember, somebody, somewhere, at some point, had to figure out they could fly. That was the winter we moved away from the building and the block and the friends we'd always known, to a street where the kids looked at us funny and didn't even answer when we asked them if they wanted to play. It's okay, I said to my brother. Somebody, somewhere, at some point, had to figure out they were ready for any new thing coming their way. So, like the people who came before us, we lifted our arms even higher, closed our eyes even tighter, breathed in even deeper, and flew the way we'd always known how to, free as the aunties and uncles and cousins who'd come before us, free as our own beautiful and brilliant minds. For a long time, the kids on the ground watched us. Then, one by one, they lifted their arms. One by one, they too learned to fly. And that is our story for this morning. The children are going to go with Mal, and they're going to talk a little bit about not Mother's Day, but Mama's Day. It's a thing. You can look it up. It's about including anyone who's nurtured you on this special day. So please rise in body or spirit and join in singing Our Children on Their Way.
Creativity will be my next story.
We gather as a religious community to give each one of us a place where we can do the work of many. Together, our light is much brighter than a solitary flame. Now is the time in our service where we share the sacred act of giving, an expression of gratitude transformed into generosity that breathes life into our mission. As part of our mission that inspires us to act on our beliefs, we share our weekly offering with a local nonprofit agency providing services within our larger community. Our charitable giving recipient for the month of May is the Kitsap Immigration Assistance Center, also known as Kayak. In a moment, our ushers will move among us with baskets to collect the offering. Donations placed inside the basket will go to Kayak. If you would like your offering to be used for KUUF, please use one of the envelopes provided to you with your order of service when you came into the sanctuary. For those joining us online, you may go to our website, kuuf.org, and select the Giving tab for PayPal and mailing information. If this is your first time at KUUF, feel free to let the basket pass you by. Your presence is your gift. Let there be an offering to strengthen and sustain our community, which is sacred to so many of us. Let us enjoy a gift of music from our music coordinator, Brian Kenny. He will play True Story, composed by Barbara Higbee. I'll give you a minute to soak that in. That was nice. Thank you. Now is the time for our joys and sorrows. When shared together, our joys are amplified and our sorrows lessened. I will start with a joy that I was able to speak with my mother this morning. We had a nice conversation, and as a novel experience, the gift that I sent her actually arrived on time. So I was very joyful about that. Ashley, and I'm sorry, Ashley, I'm going to mispronounce your last name, but Ashley Olivedo says that she's thrilled to be back at KUUF after a long marathon training cycle and successful finish at the Tacoma City Marathon last Sunday. That's awesome. Genevieve Emmett says that she has a sorrow that after 13 years of working for Kitsap Community Resources as a Head Start teacher, she's transitioning away from those smiling faces. But also has a joy that she will be starting as a paraeducator for the Bremerton School District, onward to the next challenge. We also have a joy that I think is shared by multiple people in this room, that we will be beginning choir practice Thursday at 6 o'clock, 6:30. So all of you wonderful singing voices that want to come in and join in the choir, we will be here at 6:30. I will be here at 6:30. Our new choir director will be here at 6:30. And we light one last candle for those joys and sorrows that are still too tender to share. Please join me in a moment of prayer or intention. In the spirit of community, in which we find strength and common purpose, we share our joys, our sorrows, our hopes and dreams. We've turned our minds and hearts towards one another in trust, giving love, seeking comfort, and celebrating together. We are a part of the web that makes us one with all humanity, one with all the universe. And all the moments of our lives, for those loved ones and events shared this morning, and for those we yet hold in the silence of our hearts, we are truly grateful for the love and support of this beloved community. May the spirit of life and love bring peace to us all. Amen and blessed be. Please remain seated as we sing Spirit of Life, hymn number 123 in our gray hymnal. The words will appear on your screen. For our first reading, we turn to We Are Made for These Times by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. Author and poet Clarissa Pinkola Estes is perhaps best known for her book, Women Who Run with Wolves. In a 2011 essay, Dr. Estes wrote, in part, I have heard from so many recently who are deeply and properly bewildered. They are concerned about the state of affairs in our world now. Ours is a time of almost daily astonishment and often righteous rage over the latest degradations of what matters most to civilized visionary people. You are right in your assessments, yet I urge you, ask you, gentle you, to please not spend your spirit dry by bewailing these difficult times. Especially do not lose hope. Most particularly because the fact is that we were made for these times. Yes, for years we have been learning, practicing, been in training for, and just waiting to meet this exact plane of engagement. Ours is not the task of fixing the entire world at once, but of stretching out to mend the part of the world that is within our reach. Any small, calm thing that one soul can do to help another soul, to assist some portion of this poor, suffering world, will help immensely. It's not given to us to know which acts or by whom will cause the critical mass to tip forward toward an enduring good. What is needed is an accumulation of acts, adding to, adding more, continuing. Then using the metaphor of a seaworthy ship as analogous to the human struggle, Pincola Estes concludes, we know that it does not take everyone on earth to bring justice and peace, but only a small, determined group who will not give up during the first, second, or 100th storm. One of the most calming and powerful actions you can do to intervene in a stormy world is to stand up and show your soul. When a great ship is in harbor and moored, it's safe. There can be no doubt. But that is not what great ships are built for.
Margaret Fuller, the Unitarian Transcendentalist and passionate advocate of women's rights, reminds us, reverence the highest, have patience with the lowest. Let this day's performance of the most menial duty be thy religion. Are the stars too distant? Pick up the pebble that lies at thy feet, and from it learn all. Let us join together now in a moment of reflection, followed by our post-reflection music. What does it mean to be a woman for all seasons? Title of today's sermon. Well, this month I've been thinking about why more than 200 years after she lived, Margaret Fuller's life holds significance not only for women, but for everyone as a model of liberation, of the power of one person's voice. Now, I know that the Reverend Barry Andrews, author of books about Fuller and others in the Transcendentalist circle, has spoken about her in this fellowship in the past, so Fuller's contributions are probably not unfamiliar to many of you. Fuller was indeed known for many accomplishments, and on this Mother's Day, I've been thinking how she serves as a perfect example of a woman who is not a traditional mother. A reminder that mothers come in all shapes and styles, all models, not all of whom resemble the mothers portrayed on the Hallmark cards we may receive today. To her early 1800 contemporaries, Margaret Fuller's intellect, her strength of character, her willingness to challenge tradition was no doubt unsettling. But from our perspective today, we can be grateful for the legacy she left us, a legacy that reverberates in our lives. Fuller definitely was not the traditional wife or mother. She refused to follow the standards of her New England society, the standards that her society required every woman to follow. And as a result, she introduced new ways of thinking and being in this world that changed how others understood women's roles in the world. One of her contemporaries, dazzled by Fuller, was Edgar Allan Poe, who wrote, "Humanity can be divided into three classes: men, women, and Margaret Fuller." Well, Poe's observation echoes of that of many who knew Fuller in the early 1800s. Today, her name is often overshadowed by the men who made up her Transcendentalist intellectual and social circle, including Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and Nathaniel Hawthorne. But during her lifetime, Margaret Fuller became known in America and in Europe as an intellect, a writer, a thinker, a gender maverick whose radical views about sex, religion, and society shaped 19th century thought and influenced our 21st century lives today. She was the first American woman to write about women's equality as a justice issue, not only for women, but for men. Fuller's amazing intellect was nurtured from her early childhood by Timothy Fuller, her Unitarian father, in their Cambridge, Massachusetts home. By the age of six, she was reading Latin, memorizing lengthy passages from the poet Virgil, and studying Greek and English grammar. Before her teen years, she was reading and speaking French and German, and was widely read in both English and European authors. Now, unfortunately, her father's constant pressure to expand her intellectual abilities ignored other areas of her development, including her social skills. Margaret was aware that her childhood was very different from that of other children. And because she learned her vocabulary from Plutarch and Shakespeare, she did not know how to talk to other children. She was socially awkward and shy, and she developed mannerisms. She was quite tall, so she had this mannerism of, and bad eyesight, so she had this mannerism of kind of looking down her nose at others that other children found annoying. And she found that her closest companions were her books. Now today, the young Margaret might be described as a social isolate. Well, her parents finally realized as she began her teen years that she lacked the social skills deemed necessary for a young woman in 1820s New England society. Her fondness for reading became less a source of pride to her parents and became something of a source of anxiety. Her father decided then, finally, that his daughter needed some balance to her study of Cicero and memorization of 500 lines of Virgil every week, and told Margaret she needed to develop social skills in sewing, penmanship, music, and French. Still, she continued to have trouble relating to other young women. Her sharp wit and swift rejoinders were off-putting and inspired one biographer to describe her as a Dorothy Parker in a Jane Austen world. Now, today we would probably call her a nerd. She was socially awkward, but she was brainy. Her intellectual accomplishments and natural brilliance gave her a sense of superiority, which her classmates interpreted, quite rightly, as arrogance. And perhaps that perception of arrogance was not off the mark. Later in her life, Fuller wrote, "I now know all the people worth knowing in America, and I find no intellect comparable to my own." Now, since New England's patriarchal society gave her no way to use those intellectual gifts, Margaret recognized quite quickly that as she did not meet her society's expectations for women, that she would need to forge her own path. She became an avid devotee of self-culture, which was a movement to cultivate the growth and development of the soul. And at the same time, she began moving away from her traditional Unitarian church in Cambridge, the church of her family. She felt suffocated by the services and didn't find there answers to her questions in life. She wrote, "I felt within myself great power and generosity and tenderness, but it seemed as if they were all unrecognized and impossible that they should be used in this life. I was only 1 in 20. The past was worthless, the future hopeless." She finally came to the conclusion that the only object in life was to continue to grow. Margaret's steel-trap mind, her ability to engage in witty and informed conversation, and her growing passion about abolition of slavery, the place of women in society, and the plight of Native Americans soon made her a familiar figure in Boston's educated community. At a time when no women were in college, she became the first woman permitted to use the sacred Harvard Library to continue her intellectual pursuits. And it was in this milieu that Fuller soon found her true calling, fomenting a revolution on behalf of women in society. She recognized the relationship of women's liberation to the anti-slavery movement, and she believed women had a special responsibility to fight the slavery of her day. She urged women to join the abolition movement, arguing, "Being an underdog always makes it easier to support other underdogs." Now, her anti-slavery work was supported by the way she lived her life, which was, at that time, a shocking degree of independence for a woman. And she became a working woman, making her living by presenting facilitated conversations at a time when it was illegal for a woman to do public speaking for pay. In fact, that public speaking was what led to Susan Hutchinson's expulsion from the New England community. The conversations were actually lectures designed by Fuller to promote women's self-learning in a world where they were not admitted to college, not allowed to vote, and rarely allowed to own property. But these conversations were not just academic exercises. They were a way to raise the consciousness of large groups of women whose lives would otherwise be limited by constrictive domestic roles. We might say that those conversations were the precursor to the women's consciousness-raising groups of the 1960s and 70s in the women's liberation movement. Fuller's conversations were held in a Boston bookshop owned by the Peabody sisters that was the gathering place of the area's intellectuals, including those Unitarians, Emerson, Thoreau, Theodore Parker, Elizabeth Peabody, Henry Hedge, and Fuller. Out of Hedge's Club, as the group was originally called, came that movement today is called Transcendentalism. I love the way the biographer Susan Cheever describes this group. She said, "The Transcendentalists who met in Hedge's Club were the original hippies, young, smart, and dedicated to the overthrow of the stuffy existing authorities, including the old Calvinism of the Puritans. Transcendentalism deified nature and dealt in the kinds of marvels and wonders that sometimes even transcended things like having enough to eat or making a living." When Emerson and his family moved to Concord, that rural village became the Transcendentalists' central community. And there they swept aside among themselves Calvinism, embracing liberalism and the passion for freedom that was moving throughout America. Simplicity, beauty, and the rejection of institutionalized formality, including religion, became a way of life. The Transcendentalists believed deeply in the value of each person's experience and taught that every man and even some women, including Fuller, harbored a divine spark called reason, sometimes seen as the inner light, sometimes the voice of God. Well, despite their liberal ideas, the Transcendentalists were a bit equivocal in their support for the equality of women. Fuller quickly saw the inconsistencies in their words and personally felt their lack of support. For example, Emerson had promised to write the introduction to her book, Woman in the 19th Century, which would have greatly enhanced its sales because he was very well known and popular at that time. But Emerson never followed through on writing that introduction. Now, eventually, Emerson did become a strong supporter of Fuller's work. Although her keen mind, poor social skills, and intense personality, what today we could call a high-maintenance person, all of these characteristics intimidated most men of her day. Fuller was, for Emerson, the only woman who even approached the Transcendentalist intellectual ballpark. He asked her to serve as editor of The Dial, a new journal for the Transcendentalists, and Margaret, for that magazine, wrote much of the journal's content herself. In 1843, at age 33, Fuller contributed to The Dial her groundbreaking essay, The Great Lawsuit, Man versus Men and Woman versus Women. 2 years later, she expanded that essay to the book, Woman in the 19th Century. And that book, when it hit the stores, was big. The first printing sold out immediately, becoming the manifesto for the women's rights movement, which was beginning in that area. It inspired Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton to organize the Seneca Women's Convention 2 years after the publication of the book. And in the book's 125 pages, Fuller delves into literature and philosophy to describe the oppression of the female sex through history, and she also advocates for equal status for women. Her intent was to challenge the reader's traditional thinking by considering how treatment of American Indians, blacks, and women eroded America's special genius, the promise of liberty and equality. She urged her readers to recognize that both men and women, as well as American society as a whole, suffered from gender inequality, and to open their minds to a personal transformation that would liberate their minds from prejudice and old ways of thinking. Horace Greeley, of the Go West Young Man fame, Horace Greeley was the publisher of the New York Tribune, and he called woman in the 19th century, if not the clearest and most logical, it was the loftiest and most commanding assertion yet made of the right of woman to be regarded and treated as an independent, intelligent, rational being entitled to an equal voice in framing and modifying the laws she is required to obey, of disposing of the property she has inherited or aided to acquire. He continued, Fuller's book is the ablest, bravest, broadest assertion yet made of what are termed women's rights. Well, Horace Greeley hired Fuller to write essays, reviews, and literary criticism for his paper, and she became the first woman critic who also set literary standards. In the summer of 1846, she set sail for Europe as the newspaper's foreign correspondent, another first for women. From England, she went to Italy to cover the Italian Revolution and became a passionate supporter of that movement. And for Fuller, that revolution meant freedom and human rights for the laboring class and for women. As a war correspondent, writing under combat conditions, another first, she sent vivid eyewitness accounts to the Tribune. And as the revolution spread to Rome, Fuller was on the front lines to celebrate the successful revolution and the creation of the Roman Republic. And in Rome, she met the handsome Giovanni Angelo Ossoli, and the two became lovers. Their son Angelo was born later that year. Her Concord friends, back in America, were astonished when the news reached them. What would happen when Margaret came home with her Italian lover and their child? Was it possible she had married Count Ossoli? Well, of course, the situation was a topic of many heated discussions and, naturally, lots of gossip. William Ellery Channing told everyone that marriage was impossible, that Margaret was too much of a free thinker to submit to the institution of marriage. Well, she may or may not have submitted to the institution of marriage. She did, however, form a loving partnership with Giovanni Ossoli and became a mother to Angelo. Aware that when they returned to America that they would face social censure, the Ossoli family nevertheless left Italy for the United States. And they set sail in 1850 for New York on a merchant freighter. The night before the ship's expected arrival in New York, it struck a sandbar off the New York coast and began to break apart. Although within sight of Fire Island, just a few hundred yards away, the wind and high surf made it impossible to launch lifeboats. Margaret, Giovanni, and their son Angelo all died on July 19th of 1850. Today, if you go to Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, you can see a monument to Margaret in the Fuller family plot. There are quite a few Fullers buried there. And it's right next to the marker for her grandnephew, Buckminster Fuller, the 20th century architect, philosopher, and futurist. So what can we today learn from this amazing woman, an intellectual giant of her time? After all, she launched many firsts in our history. The first American to write about equality for women, the first woman journalist for a New York newspaper, the first woman foreign correspondent and war correspondent. And in addition, Another great quality, she possessed a heroic optimism that never abandoned her. In Women in the 19th Century, Fuller writes, "Always the soul says to us, cherish your best hopes as faith and abide by them in action. Such shall be the effectual, fervent means to their fulfillment. I would beat with the living heart of the world. Let me stand in my age with all its waters flowing around me. If they sometimes subdue, they must finally upbear me, for I see the universal, and that must be the best." If existence is painful, said Fuller, if existence is painful, if the world needs improving, she believed patience and perseverance made it right in the end. "I believe in eternal progression," she insisted. "I believe in a God, a beauty and perfection to which I am to strive all my life for assimilation. From those two articles of belief, I draw the rules by which I strive to regulate my own life." Her mystical and free-thinking view of religion was that faith could not be taught through doctrine, but received from individual experience and insight. Religion, she maintained, must deal with the realities of this life, not with hopes for the next one. On this Mother's Day, it would serve each one of us, I think, mothers, fathers, everyone, to remember Fuller, a woman who lived the realities of this life, but always with hope and optimism for the future. Fuller was indeed a woman for all seasons, not just Mother's Day, but year-round. Her unconventional life and role as a woman and a mother offers us a legacy. She was optimistic, free-thinking, patriarchy challenging, radical, brilliant, and yes, eccentric. Margaret Fuller fired the movement for women's equality in America, embraced her own intellectual talents, and offered in her own life a model for living out America's promise of freedom and equality. With her characteristic passion and energy, Fuller once proclaimed, "I accept the universe," to which the Scottish writer Thomas Carlyle replied, "By gad, she'd better." And so may it be. Now I invite you to stand as you are willing and able, and let us join in our closing hymn, "Just as Long as I Have Breath." I will answer As we end our service today, please exit through the foyer. Coffee and tea will be served in the breezeway between the two buildings as usual, and you are welcome to bring your beverage and snacks back into the building if you wish. And as you get those refreshments, please consider attending the adult education program about local contemporary policing practices, which will be here in the sanctuary in another 12 minutes. So again, you're welcome to bring your coffee or tea in with you for the class. And we extinguish our chalice now with Margaret Fuller's closing words to woman in the 19th century. She writes, "Always the soul says to us, cherish your best hopes as a faith and abide by them in action. Such shall be the effectual, fervent means to their fulfillment." Amen, and so may it be.
Well, guys, this is really good. Compared to all the people that were here at service, which was the lowest number for service this year, this is a great turnout. Thank you very much for coming. But not only that, this is the first time we are taping it, so it's going to not only be done right now, you know, we could have viewers right now at home, but also it's going to be posted on the web and on YouTube and on, I guess, our site too. So you can review it at the time. And old people then, whatever they say, you can replay it and make sure that whatever they've said, they really do, right?
Hey, I'm a politician. Wait a minute. That's absolutely right, yeah. We've been on film quite a few.
Oh, here we got the lawyer. Come on, sit down.
Uh-oh.
So we've got our 3 people came just in time. This is really great. The first person, I met Jeff Schaefer when he was chasing someone down below my house, and with the big sirens and the lenses and the big lights came into my window, and I called down and I said, "What's going on?" And he called back, and it was a fugitive that came up our hill, and my neighbors have maybe 18 cameras on their house, you know, every angle outside. So the poor person was just being filmed as he went from house to house, and he didn't know he was being filmed. So it was really, but then Jeff came around and up there, and what struck me about him, he was very compassionate for the fugitive. He didn't say anything bad about him, and said, you know, that it was a domestic thing. And you know, people just get caught up in these things. So anyway, I was always impressed at that time that you're just compassionate and not, it didn't say anything harsh at all. John Giese is our sheriff. He got elected this last fall. I mean, I think re-elected, but it was interesting because he had an opponent that I didn't agree with, and I was just hoping. This is the first time I've been happy about the election results. I mean, I guess I've always been, but I never knew who the sheriff was. And this time, I was really glad you got elected. It was, go look up if you want to say something interesting, go look up what the sheriff's thing was all about this time, because it was really pretty important. The third person who was almost late is Reed. Reed Claridge, and this is my grandson, so I felt a little bit embarrassed. But he is your Oh, I'm the one that I told them to do it, and I forgot. I'm sorry. Did you hear, though, about the first 2 people? Did you hear enough about the first 2 people? Okay. Okay. It's Jeff Schaefer, John Giese. This way now? Okay. Jeff Schaefer. Is it on? Yes. Okay. Well, it's a learning thing for you guys. I mean, I'll make all the mistakes and you can do it right. So it's Jeff Schaefer is our officer, John Giese is our sheriff, and Reed Claridge is our public defender. And I've known him for a long time. But, pardon? He defended you? Well, could have. I don't know whether if I get into trouble in so many words, or he may be the person who accused me too. Actually, that's who knows. But I'm going to now. The format is that each person will probably start with Jeff over there. We're going to tell us a little bit about their job and how it relates to police practices now, and then there's going to be a chance for all 3 people to, you can ask questions about them. And I always do have a question about what exactly people do sometimes and how it affects our social structures of the community. So I'm going to turn this over to you now, Jeff.
So like Jill said, my name's Jeff. I'm in my 27th year of law enforcement. I might not look like it, but I'm 49. I got the bags under my eyes to prove it. What's funny is, this is one of my mentors, John Giese. So back when I was a teenager, I joined the cadet program, which is a law enforcement program for teenagers in the county. I rode with John dozens of times, and he showed me what it was like to be in law enforcement. The reason he's one of my mentors is he taught me how to talk to people, and no matter who they were, whether they were in crisis, victims, witnesses, suspects, John taught me how to talk to people. And that's something that served me in my career for the past 27 years, is how to talk to people, no matter what walk of life they're from, who they are, what position they're in. That's something that served me for my entire career. It served me well. It's led me to my success. And right now I'm a sergeant. That's these stripes on my sleeve. I'm a sergeant. I supervise a shift for the Bremerton Police Department, and it's one of our swing shifts. So if you drive through town in the afternoons, chances are you'll see me out there. Anyway, that's pretty much what I do. I'm a patrol person. If you call 911, chances are I'll show up, or one of my crew members will show up to handle your call. I supervise a shift, so that means that I'm responsible for staffing, making sure that the roster's filled, handle any complaints that come in, make sure that my crew has all they need to do their jobs. I approve their reports. Pretty much the face of the department. We're the ones driving around in the marked cars, the ones you see. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have. This is my favorite part of the job, is bridging the gap, answering questions, making sure you have a full understanding of what we do and why we do what we do. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have, and I'll turn the mic over to the sheriff. Thank you for being here.
Sorry. I like Jeff so much, I don't want to hurt him here by tripping him up. And thanks for those kind words, Jeff. No, Jeff is one of our superstars here in Kitsap County law enforcement. But, truth be told, I think, one thing I've been very proud in my 32 years I've been with the Sheriff's Office is we do have a wonderful group of people here who do law enforcement in Kitsap County. And I think we should all be proud of that. And I know I've had a lot of great mentors myself growing up in this agency. But thank you for having me today. John Giese, I'm the sheriff. And to correct a little bit of what Jill said, so I was actually appointed sheriff about a little over a year and a half ago when then Sheriff Simpson retired a bit early in his term. So I went through the appointment process, and Sheriff Simpson was a Democrat, so I went through the process and was nominated as one of the 3 names that goes to the commissioners and then picked, and then I was appointed sheriff in August of 21. So, and then last year I had an election and passed through that, and here I am. So, but 32 years with the agency, I moved over here from Seattle to take this job. And, I originally was only going to be here for a year or two, and then I was going to try and go back to Seattle. But I fell in love with the community, and then I met a girl and fell in love with a girl. And, then she was homegrown, she was not leaving. And, probably one of the smartest things I ever did was stay here and then marry her. And, she just retired after 30 years with the Sheriff's Office as a corrections officer. So combined, we have about 62 years of sheriff in our family. So, when I come and talk to groups, I tell folks that probably the last 4 or 5 years have been the most dynamic I've ever seen in law enforcement. Probably one of the most dynamic I've ever seen in my lifetime in our community, our society. Just a lot of stuff going on. And, I know this is going to be like a 4 or 5 minute little speech, but, when you talk about some of the big topics we talk about, we could spend days talking about each topic. First we had COVID, and COVID did greatly impact our organization, especially the jail. Our jail had over 400 incarcerated folks in it. In a matter of weeks, we dropped that down to 150 by working with the defense bar, judges, prosecutors, to try and clear people out of the jail so they wouldn't be as exposed to COVID. But it impacted everything we did. I mean, you were not taking people to jail unless it was a very serious crime. The courts actually, for the most part, closed down for a year or two, and that backed up, and that they're still kind of dealing with the backlog, right? And so, so big impacts are COVID. And then the political impacts of COVID. Was the sheriff responsible for enforcing masking rules? A lot of debate, a lot of issues about, what should we do, what shouldn't we do. So that was COVID, and that probably would have been a big enough, challenge for a couple years. But, 2020 saw George Floyd and a massive, massive turnout across the country as far as protests. And, I think probably more protests than probably since the Vietnam War, right? And we had protests here too. And I always like to tell people we had them Kitsap style. So what that looked like is people would call us up and say, we'd like to do a protest. And we said, okay, we will help. And so we had protests all over the county, and they were very, very peaceful, and they were well organized. And even one here in Bremerton, which got a little bit heated, we had minority community leaders standing shoulder to shoulder with the police chief to that group saying, hey, listen, what you're talking about doesn't happen here. And that was really powerful. And I mean, really, I think that's one of the things we have here is really good relationships with our community. Partly because we're on an island, we're a tight, small community. I think that helps too. But I think years and years of trying to build those relationships is really important. And that relationship building still continues today. But with George Floyd and all those calls for police reform, the state of Washington was probably one of the most progressive in the country as far as enacting police reform. They enacted 13 major bills that affected everything we do. Hiring, firing, training, use of force, how to record, data as far as use of force, car stops, just dramatic changes. All that was passed in March of 21 and had to become effective in July of 21. So in 3 months, we had to totally retool our whole agency, our whole way of thinking, our whole understanding of use of force and everything else. And we did it, but it was hard. It was very hard. And, there was new terms, new definitions that nobody knew what they meant. And it put us in an awkward position, and it put the street officers in a very awkward position. But we're working through it, and we took a positive attitude that we were going to keep going forward. We weren't going to sit down and just give up. We were just going to do what we needed to do to adapt, and that's really the way it's been for the last couple of years. And there were some changes in the law last year, and there's some changes in the law this year, right? And you still hear a lot of discussion and debate about police pursuits, and now especially the drug law. What's the drug law going to be? There's a lot of controversial debates on that right now. So anyway, that was okay. So we had COVID, we had police reform, and hey, we're still rolling with the punches. But now, it's like in the last 2 years, we've dealt with this massive staffing turnover. And we weren't the only industry that's been dealing with that. But a third of my agency has 3 years or less right now. It's just been a tremendous turnover. Last year, we hired 35 deputies. Now, we only have 120 deputies. So, that kind of turnover has just been huge. And part of that is because there's a lot of dinosaurs like Jeff and I that started about 30 years ago and are getting the good sense to retire. So that was a big piece of it. But now we are seeing officers that are retiring, maybe not at 30 years, but maybe they're going to go at 20 years or 25 years. They're getting out of the business. And again, everybody's kind of suffering in the same thing, trying to find qualified people. And it's not just law enforcement. You see the same problem with nurses. You see the same problem with mental health professionals. I'd love to have more programs with mental health professionals. I have a full-time deputy who works with a mental health professional. It is hard to find somebody to do that work. And when you talk about resources out there in the community, what you have out there, there's not a lot of it. So that's a struggle. So anyway, police reform, staffing, COVID. Okay, certainly things are going to get better. Well, wait, let's talk about crime. That's up too. You watch TV and you'd think, oh my gosh, I should get in my bunker and hunker down and protect myself. But crime is going up. It is going up. And some stuff that I think is kind of startling to Jeff and I that we haven't really seen in 30 years. So, there is. And how are we going to respond to that? And we talk about, is there proactive policing or is there reactive policing? To be honest with you, we're more in a reactive mode right now because of staffing issues and everything else. We're not out there being super aggressive. So, how do we deal with crime issues? How do we work with our communities to deal with crime issues? That's another big issue. And then, that's all well and good. So we can deal with COVID. We can deal with police reform. We can deal with staffing issues. I bet we can even deal with crime. But then, we have 3 big issues that impact us tremendously too. Unsheltered homelessness, homeless encampments. I think Jeff and I, since we've been here, we've always found a person or two out in the woods, but we never really saw homeless encampments. Certainly not to the degree maybe we're seeing them in other communities across Puget Sound, but we do have them here. So what's our response to that? And I think we've taken a very measured response. Our policy is we want to get people into services. We want them to get into stable housing. That's what we're trying to do. But on the same token, trying to balance that with trying to keep encampments out of our parks and out of our streets. And I'll tell you, as sheriff, I've noticed a dramatic difference between now and a year ago. A year ago, there was a lot of compassion towards homeless and homeless encampments. I don't hear that compassion so much anymore. People are getting more mad now. And, but then again, it's resources. There's just, you scratch the surface here and there's just not a lot of resources. So we could talk about homelessness. But we should also talk about mental illness, untreated mental illness. We see a lot more of that these days. And again, there's not a lot of resources out there. There's not a lot of teeth in the law for us to deal with that sometimes too. And that's one of those big questions. It's like, at some point, people's rights have to suffer if we're not helping them. And that kind of goes into the third big social issue we're seeing, which is drug addiction. Drug addiction is increasing dramatically. I mean, we're seeing it across our agency. Fentanyl overdoses are going up dramatically. A fentanyl pill only costs 30 cents right now to buy. It is incredibly easy to get. And so how do we deal with that? I personally, I do lobby that we should have some sort of law about public use of hard drugs and possession of hard drugs. But what's the balance? You want those people to get treatment and get help. Even if there's an intersect with crime, if the cause is the addiction, you treat the addiction, right? You don't want to necessarily throw people in jail for 3-4 years just because they have drugs. I get that. But on the same token, you got to help people. And if you're watching them kind of literally die on these street corners, that's not right either. So, yeah, I'm happy to answer questions. I've given you about 8 different topics there. So, yeah, time, yeah, sorry, the sheriff, what can I say? Reed, bring it home.
Thank you, John. Well, I've got a little less experience than these two, but I can attest I have been alive for 32 years. My name is Reed Claridge. I was born in Philly, but grew up in Bremerton, so I like to think I've got a bit of that Quincy Jones vibe going for me. I came back to this community. I've worked in the legal field for about 10 years now, but just have recently transferred over the past year and a half to defense work, particularly in KidSAP. I've been through 2 defense firms, and now I work for the county as a public defender. And it's been interesting because my first job, I was covering the Superior Court of KidSAP. My second was the Bremerton Municipal Court. And now I'm in KidSAP District Court with the simple and gross misdemeanors there. And so I've got a big swath of the population just in this 1 year and a half. And it's such a complex system. I like to tell all of my clients that this isn't a justice system. You hear those words a lot, but this is a legal system, and justice is in another courtroom. My job is to get everyone who's kind of in the legal system as unentangled with the legal system as possible. I think it's a cumbersome type of issue. It is a compromise for a societal contract, but there's lots of opportunities we have to address issues that haven't gone on in a lot of the vulnerable population's life over here. I like to think, to a lot of my clients that these people don't really need an attorney. They need caring and active parents from the ages of 5 to 13 that they just did not have growing up for the most part. And so it's incredible to have Officer Schaefer and Sheriff Giese here. They are the front lines to this entire system, and it is amazing what a myriad of resources that we have that can try and fill in the gaps. But of course, with all of these individuals, if you grow up in a dysfunctional household, of course, you don't know what the normal is, and it's always just a big kind of a big sticky situation trying to work with each individual to find out what's going to work best with them in the community to reintegrate them and keep them out of harm's way and creating problems for everyone else out there. But that's I think the reason why we're all here. It's amazing to work in KidSAP. I think that I believe in the principle of charity, that no matter where we're from, 99.99% of us are trying to do the best we can with what we've got. And that's no exception to any of my clients out there either. It's my day-to-day work is pretty interesting right now. At the county, this week I'm going to be on the arraignments calendar. And so I'm really bitter at Giese for putting out this warrant and DUI emphasis these past couple of weeks, because that's going to be a lot more work on my behalf over these. next couple. But what I essentially will be doing this week is kind of handling the warrant quashes when people fail to appear for court or have a warrant placed over them that they may not have known about, like from a previous legal issue that may have slipped through the cracks. I'll try to address those in the morning, and then I'll do the afternoon arraignments, which is when everyone who's in custody kind of appears for what's called a preliminary hearing, gets their, like I advise them of their rights, enter a not guilty plea for them, make sure they're appointed counsel, and then perform a bail and release argument to try and keep them in the released on their personal recognizance so they can still undergo treatment programs and that kind of thing while trying to deal with these legal issues. Kitsap County is fairly, well, it's kind of emblematic of a lot of issues that you'll see along the I-5 kind of corridor there, namely that double helix of just mental health and substance abuse kind of issues affecting the indigent portions of the population out here. And it's been quite humbling kind of coming back to this county and almost having a bittersweet high school reunion on every week where I see more and more of the people I grew up with from my high school and from the neighboring high schools kind of rolling through the programs. But I do feel honored that I can provide the courts and the judges and the prosecutions a bit more of their context, understanding where they're from, detailing what they were like in high school and in junior high, even elementary school in some cases, and can give a bigger context of the snapshot of where their life is going and what we can do to kind of get out of these legal situations. But I'll give the floor back to you also to ask some questions, but I'm very excited and it's an honor to be here with the community. To echo Mr. Giese and Mr. Schaefer here, communication is so important, especially in this day and age. COVID, we're still communicating, but sometimes it feels like the car needs a bit of tune-up to get where it's going sometimes with the conversation. And I think all we can do in this kind of heightened tension and heightened politically divided time is just keep talking to one another. I'm a firm belief that there's still more in common with the most disparate adversaries than there is focused on in the media that what divides us. And so as long as we keep communicating and try our best to resist the impulse to be disgusted by someone's personality or point of view, and instead try to understand where their experiences and values have led them to that kind of position. But let's keep talking, and I'll give you the mic.
Good, thank you very much. All of you were very nice and clear. I think we can have questions from all of you now and make them concise or directed maybe toward one person or all three. But there's so much to cover. And I just want to say, I always think whatever happens here for you at the end, you at the more beginning, but it really started between the years 6 months and 5 years. And there's been so little emphasis on parenting, a good time, it's Mother's Day, but it's so important, and like Reed says, to have something that happened way before. Of course, you can't do anything about it now. So opening up to the floor. Questions? I think that what we're going to do is just restate your question.
Okay. The sheriff and also Bronson Schaefer. What policies specifically have changed since George Floyd as far as trying to prevent a similar situation happening again?
What policies have changed since George Floyd for the sheriff and the police officer?
I think when you talk policies, there was pretty significant changes in use of force laws. So that was, something we had to roll and adapt to. A lot of different training now for de-escalation. And, when you think of de-escalation, that's a little bit more complex than what I guess, people think that's just talking to people and maybe calming them down. But for us, it's also tactics too. It's like time, distance, shielding, trying to use other means so we can slow things down. There's actually a duty to intervene. We always had a policy of duty to intervene, but now it's a law to duty to intervene. So that's a big change. And all these laws we've, incorporated into our policies and our training. But those are probably the biggest ones.
One question.
Sure.
What does duty to intervene mean?
Sure. Well, like in the George Floyd thing, you had Chauvin, who was the officer who had his knee on the neck of the George Floyd, but he wasn't the only one charged. Officers around were charged for not stopping him, right? And so we had that in our policy, but now it's very clear in the law there is a duty to intervene, and we've trained our officers that, and a lot of the scenario-based training we do covers some of that stuff. So those are probably the biggest changes right now.
So here's something to realize. If you see something happening in Minneapolis or South Carolina or whatever, don't assume that that's what happens here. Did you know that the Minneapolis Police Department, their policy allowed officers to put a knee on a neck? It's in their policy. That's never been a policy in this state. When I went to the academy in 1996, there's never been a policy in effect where you put your knee on someone's neck. We were trained, you put the knee on the upper back to restrain them, to keep them from getting them off the ground. Never in the history of my career has there ever been a policy where you were allowed to put your knee on someone's neck. So please don't make the assumption that because you see that happening in another region of the country, that happens here. That was never the case. So that's something I want people to be aware of, and I explain that to everyone that we get into this discussion with. It's appalling. I can't believe that was actually a policy in another police department, another part of the country. It goes against everything we've ever been trained to do here. And as far as duty to intercede, it's a shame that they have to make that a law, because as long as I've ever been a cop, you don't need a law to step in and say, dude, stop that. That's ridiculous. Am I right? And in my 27 years, with my own two eyes, I see it on TV. It happens because you see it on TV. You saw it in Minneapolis. You've seen it on the news. I've never witnessed a coworker use excessive or unreasonable force. I've never seen it. And when I tell people that, some people don't believe me. But it's the truth. Now, I've heard people say things to suspects that are inappropriate. We've had to discuss it afterwards. But we do it right in this state, and we always have during my career. And so that you have to make duty to intercede a law, I mean, okay, that's fine. But it's, and as far as de-escalation goes, that's been a big topic over the last couple of years. We've been doing that for the last 27 years. That's when I talk about how I learned to talk to people from this guy, that's what I've been doing for 27 years. That's why I've never been in a huge fight at work. Have I used force? Yes. Okay, force is ugly, but I've had to use lawful and reasonable force to take people into custody before, okay? But it's been just that, lawful and reasonable, because I know how to talk to people. And that's how I've been in so fewer uses of force, is because it's all about de-escalation. And that's what most of us have been doing since the dawn of time. So don't assume that because other parts of the country are doing this wacky stuff that we're part of that. We're leading the way here in at least Western Washington, if not the whole state, because that's the way we were taught. That's the way we've been doing things. So I just want everybody to know that we're cutting edge up here. So.
Other questions? Yeah.
Well, I think Joe's question. I think Joe had her hand up before me.
Oh, all right. Oh, yeah. Thanks. My question's about the navigator program.
Oh, yeah.
It's very helpful and hopeful, and I'm wondering how it works and how effective is it?
So she's talking about our behavioral health navigator, and in case you're not aware, it's a new program, maybe 3-4 years old now. I use it all the time. So here at Bremerton PD, we have 2 behavioral health navigators, and they're civilians with a mental health background, training, not. So anyway, what I call them is, I mentioned bridging the gap, and that's what they do. They're embedded in our police department, and if you think back a couple of years ago, you think about the police department, and you think about the community. We're not mental health professionals. Everybody knows that. We know that. You know that. Okay? And you think about the biggest change in law enforcement position does, it bridges that gap. When we go on a call and we're dealing with somebody, not necessarily in crisis, those are generally easy for us. Those are the people that we can take into protective custody, get them up to the hospital, because that's an immediate crisis. We can get them help immediately. The folks that we have trouble with are the ones who are right on the cusp. They don't necessarily meet the criteria to take into custody, but they definitely need some help. That's when the navigator steps in. The navigator has access to so many more resources than what we have available to us. In fact, I use them, my shift uses them on a regular basis. I just had one last week. I shoot the navigator an email. I say, hey, this person is in this sort of trouble. The navigator reaches out to all these other resources and can get that person some help, stuff that I know nothing about. They're especially effective with kids. That's been one of our weaknesses in law enforcement, is help for kids in trouble. I took a navigator with me to a school one time where there was a kid having trouble. And this navigator starts spouting off all these things that I had no clue that even existed. So the navigator it was Joe? I think we've met before, Joe. Yeah. The navigator is just this fantastic resource that we have now that kind of adds to our ability to help folks out there. And it's just a phenomenal resource for us. Maybe the sheriff has something to add. Put him on the spot.
Well, it is a phenomenal resource. But actually, we have a similar program. We started out about 5 years ago carrying a full-time deputy with a mental health professional, but a level of mental health professional that's called a DCR. And a DCR has the ability under the state of Washington to actually hold people and detain people for mental illness. When I talked about staffing issues, so our DCR that we got retired, and then it was 8 months before we got another one. Then we got another one, and then he retired, and then we went 6 months without one. So we adapted our program. Now we have a mental health professional who doesn't quite reach that level, but we have somebody that works with us, and they do. They go out actually in the field. They respond to calls with the full-time deputy, but probably most importantly, they try and follow up. They try to make sure that these people that are high utilizers that we see a lot try and get connected into services. And so it works really well, and I think throughout the county, there's a number of navigator programs, at least like our program, the Farmington program. Colesville has the CARES program, which is it includes the fire and stuff too. So there's a lot of stuff coming online now that is meant to kind of address those issues. Interestingly enough, so like in our program, I'm really proud of our program, but the deputy's funded through one grant, and the mental health professional gets funded through another grant. Those grants are year to year, so we live on a year-to-year existence. Oh, did I turn it off? Sorry about that.
I don't think it was on all this time. No.
Okay. Reed, you want to try? Anyway, so I hope you heard most of that. But anyway, so yeah, there's a lot of great programs out here, but a lot of them are actually funded through grants, which kind of is a precarious existence.
Yes. Eric.
Thank you all for being here so much. I work with some of you frequently, and I work with the DCRs a lot and the navigators very, very often. I'm frustrated, I guess, that I don't think the accountability is at the right level when the officers on the boots on the ground out in the neighborhoods are being punished for policy. That should be your job, actually, taking the hit, or the mayor, or the governor, or somebody at that level that's really going to filter down to everybody and say, this is not right. It's not right at this level. It's not right at that level up there. And I don't think it gets there enough for me. And I would like to see that happen a lot more. Police chiefs, governors, mayors, losing jobs over the policies of their police departments. Because interfacing with us is a huge responsibility, right? And it's taught to the people that come in by the senior people who keep going up in the ranks. And if we don't change that, like Baltimore humbling people, or the policy, they said George Floyd's policy, or the amount of military weapons being brought into police forces, it's just setting those folks up to interact with the public in a less than healthy way, in my opinion. And so I would like to see that accountability ratcheted all the way up. And if you have a strategy for that, I'd love to hear it, how that could happen. And as far as the DCRs are concerned, the bar in the DCR is so incredibly high. Almost literally, if the person is not saying I'm going to hurt myself, or I intend to kill myself, or I intend to kill somebody else, that's the bar. That's where the bar is, just so you know. So someone can live in the alley behind where I work.
What does DCR mean?
Designated crisis responder, sorry. I think they all work, they're contracted at a KMH, Kitsap Mental Health, right? And they come, but that's where the bar is. So someone can stay in the alley behind me and be in absolute crisis, and as long as they're not threatening someone else's life or their own, then essentially the designated crisis responder is helpless to make that determination that they're going to take that person's rights to make their own decisions away, and then maybe we'll ask for law enforcement to come in and back that up, and the person actually gets on a non-emergent detention where they're picked up and taken somewhere for help. But, anyway, so if you have a strategy, where would I go to try and make that understood, that I would like that level of responsibility to be higher than the folks that are interacting with the community? Sorry, that's.
I think you were loud.
Did you want, and are you going to direct that to anybody, or?
Just a general
Yeah.
statement. I'm sure you've heard probably many, many times, but I just don't think the accountability is where it needs to be.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I wasn't going to attest too much to the accountability, but I will say that over the past 5 to 7 years, I have seen more and more resources kind of coming in to address these issues as the legal process kind of unfolds. I think we'd be remiss to not give a shout out to Lori Wilson and the True Blood program as to one of those ones, which is essentially able to work with the DCRs from KMH, and then when people, if they are detained in custody, has a really on top of it program with a couple professionals who are able to give, provide them assistance, take them to their medical appointments, get them to their court hearings and that kind of thing. And so I can't attest to the accountability to who's up top or that kind of thing, but I can say that the people who are up top are seeing these problems and putting more money into it. Can we talk more about that later? Certainly, Eric.
So when you're talking about the definition of, there's something called an ITA, is what we typically call it. It's the Involuntary Treatment Act. That's outlined in the RCW, the law, the Revised Code of Washington. The definition of when we can take someone into protective custody, it's pretty clear. So if you're talking about something at the RCW level, that's obviously something that can be changed by a lawmaker. So if you have concerns about that, like I always say, Sergeant Schaefer, what do we do about this drug law? What do we do about this? Write your legislator. That's what I say. So if that's what you're referring to, Eric, write your legislator. Please help us out. If we want to get into drug law topics later, I'm primed. We can talk about that here in a minute. As far as when you guys call, we deal with the Salvation Army all the time. That's where Eric works. I talk to Eric once in a while. There's people in crisis down there. Usually it's drug-induced, but we do deal with a lot of mental health crises down there. So when we get there, what we have to deal with is, like he said, it's written in the RCW. Are these people a danger to themselves or others? Are they able to take care of themselves? There's all these criteria that has to be met. We have to make that call right then and there. And oftentimes, it's up to us whether or not they go to the hospital. The DCR isn't necessarily involved at that point. However, if we're not involved, the DCR sometimes is involved behind the scenes, and they can issue what's called a pickup order. That sometimes is trouble. And that's what I think what you're referring to is trying to get them to make a decision on these folks. in this sergeant's opinion, the mental health system is severely broken. And we are the ones that there's always been a problem with. Law enforcement isn't doing their job. The cops aren't doing their job. That's hogwash. We're the ones doing our job. We get them to the hospital when appropriate. And then to our dismay, they're wandering around the streets 6 hours later. Okay? So we're the ones that have stepped up in the last 10 or 15 years. We've gotten all the mental health training. Everything we need to do, we're doing the best we can. And then the ball's getting dropped somewhere down the road, and that's the honest truth, in my opinion. Okay? And something needs to be fixed beyond law enforcement. There's a broken system somewhere. Okay? So I don't know where that's at. All I can say is from our end, we're doing what we can. And there's something beyond that is someone's dropping the ball. And I can't speak to that. I'm not an expert, but there's a broken part somewhere. So that's all I can say on that. And when it comes to legislation, when it comes to something in the law, you got to write to your legislators. It's not a police chief. It's not a sheriff issue. It's a state issue, a governor issue, a legislative issue.
And maybe then it's also a resource issue, and other people can speak to this because, oh yes, go ahead.
Just to wrap that up, to what extent are you guys working with your legislators to affect laws?
How much is the police department or the sheriff's department working with legislators to change the law? Maybe you're not even allowed to do too much.
Well, I'll take a stab at this and kind of will answer maybe your question a little bit too, Eric. You know, as sheriff, I'm an elected official. I respond directly to the citizens of Kitsap County. When you talked about accountability, the average life expectancy of a police chief is about 3 years. I mean, just a constant change. And yes, they're held accountable, and if that person doesn't do a good job, they're out of there. So as a sheriff, I have a 4-year term. I can be recalled if I'm doing really a bad job, or unelected if I go 4 years and you're not happy with the job. But one thing you hear talk about appointed sheriff versus elected sheriff. I'd always advocate for an elected sheriff because I do have that ability to speak plainly. And when I do talk to the legislators, and I've talked to them all, I can speak from my heart. I can speak without worry about somebody else pulling my puppet strings from behind me. And I like to think I talk to the legislators with the interest of the citizens. And, I find the legislators here very responsive. The process down in Olympia is Byzantine. I mean, it's hard for an outsider to actually see what's going on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute basis. But we do. We talk to the legislators a lot. And, interestingly enough, of the discussions I've had with the legislators over the last couple of years, what we heard in 2020 and 2021 is when they enacted all those laws, it's like, hey, we know these are going to have to be adjusted, right? Because we're taking the first step. In fact, Washington was one of the first states to do some of this stuff. So, but what I heard from legislators is, no problem. We'll fix it if it's broken. Well, what we're finding is that fix can be incredibly hard to actually do over the last couple of years. So there's a lot of debate and argument about it. So, anyway.
And just to give some of the context regarding this, because it's not quite clear for everyone when someone who is undergoing mental health issues and or substance abuse issues is taken into custody, that it's incumbent upon law enforcement to restore them to do all of this. The system doesn't quite work like that. They see a problem, they address it, they make a decision to arrest or leave or keep someone remain, have them seek treatment, what have you, at the scene there. But after that, the charging becomes a prosecutor issue. And so then it becomes my job to kind of try to get someone released to try and address the treatment or see what we can do about this. And a significant portion of my clientele are incompetent either to understand the legal issues facing them or incompetent to functionally assist in a trial, which means that the legal system, it is unconstitutional to convict those people of them. And so they're hanging in this limbo space where they're declared incompetent, but they're facing these charges. And Western State, which is the consolidated mental health restoration facility of Washington, currently has, I think, an 8 to 9 month in custody wait for like dangerous felony restorations. Those are the highest priorities, and it takes over half a year to get those people into a restoration program. For misdemeanors, it jumps up to about 11 months in custody. That means that if they're held on bail and can't afford to be released, they will be in custody for 11 months before they even go to the restoration to see if they can be restored to stand trial for the charge. Additionally, those out of custody facing it have about a 14-month wait on that. Western State is a huge issue. It's pretty clear that something happened in the funding levels, basically plateaued somewhere in the 90s there, and with all of the change, like a cultural revolution and differences in in drug manufacturing these days, it cannot keep up with the system. And of course, Washington, being the most regressively taxed state, is remiss to introduce a major kind of legislative package that would jump up the taxes on the higher income people, potentially scaring away more of the so-called job producers and creators of the area during a kind of flight from Washington at this time. And so it's fairly politically fraught. But to answer your question as far as accountability, my job is typically just to continue suing Western State till they do their job.
How many of these people, and you can repeat the question, how many of these people can be restored? In other words, it sounds like they're permanently damaged.
It's really tough to say. It's a case-by-case basis. They're like, I'm not a mental health professional. Like, I have my own kind of hunches and that kind of thing, just dealing with so many individuals who have specific psychoses or symptoms of those. But it's really a case-by-case basis. Sometimes you can call them when someone can't be restored, and sometimes you ought to help them get a bad evaluator who says that someone's competent when it's fairly obvious they aren't, or they're not, and you have to go appeal that decision and go through a major process to see what that is. But one of the major issues is a lack of kind of standardized care and consistency for these evaluations for mental health professionals. Just because, as you've seen over the past 20 years in American, the medical system writ large, if someone is on the kind of autistic spectrum there, it's a flip of a coin if they go to one provider who says that they've got this distinct Asperger's symptoms, and then if they go to another, then it's like, oh no, you're this far on the autism thing. And there's a lack of consistency between these diagnoses, and that's inherent in the criminal justice system, unfortunately, as well.
Anybody else? Yes. And then Jerry next.
Can I bring this up to you?
I was quite shocked to hear in some law enforcement departments elsewhere in the country that a number of the officers were pure white supremacists who tried to get into law enforcement so they would have the freedom to enact their worst proclivities. How do you screen to make sure that people with those sorts of beliefs don't get on your force?
Yeah, good question. So, there's a long process to go through. You take a written test, you take a physical agility test, you come in, you do it's like a 60-page background questionnaire, asks all your affiliations. Your social media is scrutinized. You're asked to, what affiliations you have with groups. And then you have to pass a psychological test too, and there's a battery of tests they give folks. Could somebody squeak in? Maybe, but I'm pretty happy to say I have never encountered anything like that I've seen in my agency, and I don't really see that anywhere else. Here anyway. So, but yeah, it would be a problem. I mean, there was some folks that, some law enforcement officials that showed up in the January 6th riots. I mean, and they were fired, and they should have been fired. I mean, I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, did you catch what region of the country that was in?
Not really. Seattle. There were some.
Was it really?
There was one officer.
It was on the national news, I heard it as well.
he had an SS kind of symbol on his door or something that he got fired for.
Oh, that was, I think that was Kent. And yeah, I saw that in the news as well. And unheard of in this county. I was with the sheriff's office for 12 years. I defected to Bremerton because I wanted to make more money to retire on. But anyway, unheard of in this county. I've never heard of such a thing. But again, I don't know, because it's such a strenuous screening process. And I can tell you, I just relinquished it to another sergeant, but I was the supervisor of our field training program for 2 years, and that's where once the recruit gets out of the academy, they're assigned to field training officers for about 3 months to, learn how to do the job once they get out of the academy. And you see them. They get graded by these field training officers, so you're seeing them after the academy, after they learn, and you see their tendencies. And at no time, not only during my time as a supervisor of that job, but any time, I've never had a coworker. I've never seen a coworker with any sort of biases, any sort of tendencies for anything like that. It exists because you see it on TV. You see it in the news, but I've just never experienced it personally. So, I think our region leads the way in screening. I've heard of regions that don't do background checks or don't do psychological testing, and it's just absurd. I get the impression that there are some regions that you go apply and they give you a gun and car keys and go police. There was a line of duty death in South Carolina, in Florence, South Carolina, where the officer hadn't even been to the academy yet. And I'm going, why is he working the road by himself with no training? It mystifies me. I don't understand that. So other regions do things differently. So please just keep in mind that what you see happening in Memphis, what you see happening in these other regions, is not the way we do business up here. So.
When you said there was not a bias, the big thing now that actually this group is trying to learn is all this unconscious bias. And I've been so surprised with myself when I've found myself with unconscious bias. You just come from. So I think we all have this unconscious because we've grown up with, with it all. I'm going to say Jerry first, and then you. Okay.
Thank you. At this time, if somebody with mental illness and say psychotic symptoms, who's not doing well, ends up in Kitsap County Jail or Bremerton City Jail, what resources are there to say work with that person's case manager at KMHS or make sure they get their medications appropriately, have somebody with some kind of medical training to look them over? Right now, what kind of resources are there for that?
We use the county jail. We don't have a city jail anymore. So.
Yeah, I'll start that one. Yeah. So the sheriff is in charge of the county jail, and we contract with all the local cities and the 2 tribes. So everybody who's incarcerated here in Kitsap County usually ends up in our jail. Dramatically different environment than it was 20 years ago. I think we're spending north of $3 million a year on medical and mental health services. And we have doctors, nurses, mental health professionals in the jail. But, I'll tell you, it's the majority of folks in the jail right now have either a mental health issue, an addiction issue, or a serious medical issue, or all 3. Very vulnerable population. And we've really ramped up the programs we have for helping people who suffer from mental illness. And as Reed talked about, some of these people sit in jail for months waiting to go to a competency hearing. And the jail is not a therapeutic environment. It is not. And we can't change that short of, millions of dollars of facility fix. But we try to do what we can. We try to be responsive to the people with mental health issues. Where we really tried to up our game is for folks who leave jail. We have 2 reentry specialists that specialize in trying to connect them with services once they leave jail, whether that's mental health or in jail. People can do medically assisted treatment for addiction, which brings them off addiction slow and a little bit more humanely than just going cold turkey. But if you're on the MAP program, as it's called, it's really important that you stay connected once you leave for that to be a success. So we do have now a grant that we're going to open another wing, and it's going to specialize in those reentry services. So people, as they get close to leaving the jail, they'll have ability to talk about, if they're homeless, housing options, if it's a matter of a job, maybe what we can do to help steer them towards that. And I think we work with 15 different community partners now with our reentry program. So, but it's a tough environment. It really is. So, you guys want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, and I think I've got some information there as well. And so I'm typically, once I get assigned a case, my main job becomes not trying to win that case at trial so much for most of my clients, as much as trying to find a sentencing alternative that will fit for them, give them the kind of education and resources they need to hopefully not find themselves in a similar situation. And so we've got drug court in Kitsap County. We've got like a residential, like a drug-orienting sentencing alternatives. We have like those 15 agencies are on top of most of their things for anything from mental health to chemical dependency, domestic violence, and family planning as well. And so, oh yeah, we did. Yep, and we've got behavioral health court and veterans court, and so typically it's finding the right kind of system, because everyone's kind of diagnoses and treatment plans going to be slightly different. It's not a blanket solution for everyone. And particularly one of the interesting areas I'm most curious about is governing those with a dual diagnoses, chemical dependency and mental health issue. Those cases are particularly problematic because you need a very experienced, comprehensive mental health and substance abuse specialist to kind of undergo a lengthy evaluation with them. And because treating them for chemical dependency or mental health won't really address the other unless they're taken through interlocking incremental steps on that front. And it's really difficult sometimes to identify those clients who are more affected by one or the other, kind of a chicken or the egg for some of the mental health and chemical dependencies. But when you have that dual diagnosis where they have to both be addressed at the same time, there aren't too many health specialists that are certified or capable of that kind of treatment in the area. But we are getting some of the COVID money coming in to boost those programs.
You were next.
So I know it's a layered question, but us obviously with 3 little ones, I know there's always been drugs, but it just seems like drugs are just everywhere, and it's really bad. Yeah, and what are we doing? I mean, I'm a stay-at-home mom, but I'm like, it just seems like, we're handing out business cards to say, and I don't know if that's what Kitsap County does. I know Seattle, where it's just like, here's a place to get help, and that's it. And okay, thank you.
Yes. Say no more. So, 2 years ago, the state Supreme Court, it's called the Blake decision, if you're not familiar with it, they struck down the drug possession law based on the way it was written. So if you want to fall asleep easy tonight, real easy, read the Blake decision. It'll put you right out. So it went back to the legislators for them to, if they chose to, rewrite it to make drug possession illegal again. They chose not to. So what we have now is this fantastic drug law. It's now a misdemeanor, but here's the hoops you got to jump through first. So if we catch somebody with drugs, we have to issue them a treatment form. So we print out this treatment form in our car. We hand it to them. We say, go get yourself some drug treatment. Okay. Now, I don't know if anybody in here, and don't answer this question, but if you've ever been through addiction, and we give you a form, do you go right down and get drug treatment? No, you probably won't. Okay. So we use this there's this cool system. It's called Sector. Usually we write tickets from it. It's a cool database. It keeps track of everything. So once we give you 2 of these treatment forms, the third one's a misdemeanor for your drug possession, okay? And then the courts can charge you with drug possession, misdemeanor drug possession, okay? So the second time we catch you with drugs, we can give you this treatment form and go, hey, go get treatment, okay? Do you think anybody does that? No, okay? So the third time we can charge you with a misdemeanor. It never happens, all right? So the state legislators just met. They couldn't come up with an agreement to make drug possession illegal again. So now Jay Inslee even said, you guys have to have a special session. You got to come up with something here, okay? Now, the problem is I don't think any of us in this room want people serving prison time for drug possession. It's pointless. Am I right? Okay? We want treatment. Because when your house gets burglarized, when your car gets broken into, when you pay extra for stuff at Wilco or Target because people shoplift, that's all drug fueled, okay? So in an ideal world, if we didn't have any drug addicts, your house wouldn't be getting burglarized, your car wouldn't be getting broken into, and we'd be paying cheaper prices for stuff at Wilco and Target, okay? So, but the problem is, people aren't gonna go to drug treatment on their own, okay? The old saying goes, it's not for people who need it, it's for people who want it, okay? However, what's more effective is if there's the possibility of jail time looming over their heads, okay? That is leverage to get people to go to treatment more often than not. And that's the problem that we have now is there's no leverage. These folks aren't going to drug treatment on their own, okay? And what really brought this home for me was, people call me a hero sometimes, and I'm no hero, okay? Half of my job's sitting behind a desk, the other half's driving around monitoring what my officers are doing. The heroes to me, and they're far and few between in my job, are the folks that have overcome their addictions, and they're out there helping people. And these people make me cry. They bring tears to my eyes because of what they've overcome. They've kicked these drug habits, and they're out there helping people. And they're my heroes. And these folks are out there going, what in the heck is going on with society right now? These drugs, I drive downtown once a day, I catch someone smoking pills. And that's the thing right now. No one's doing heroin anymore because they're smoking these fentanyl pills that are 30 cents a piece now. They put them on tinfoil, they light a fire underneath it, and they inhale the vapors off the pills. And that's how they get high, okay? And I catch them doing it on a daily basis. Yes, sir? So my understanding is that if you take the pill, it's a death sentence if you swallow the pill. So smoking it is quite dangerous because some days I go with Bremerton Fire to 3 overdoses in one shift. That's just my shift. Overdose deaths, maybe 1 a week on just my shift. It is outrageous what is going on out there with this stuff. And there's nothing to stop it. I'm going to get long-winded here, try to be quick. So up until the Blake decision, the Sheriff's Office had WestNet and Bremerton PD had SOG, Special Operations Group. These were drug units, you know, the narcotics groups, the guys that walked around with ugly beards and the T-shirts that enforced drug laws. Well, after the Blake decision, both departments disbanded those drug units. And the reason is, a lot of those drug units were effective because they would start off with, I always equate it to, they started off with acorns. Those acorns turned into oak trees. The acorns were the drug users. They'd get arrested for a small amount of drugs. The drug detectives would go to them and said, hey, would you like to work that charge off by going and making these buys? Okay, raise your hand if you have a neighborhood with a drug house. You'll know it by short stay traffic, junk cars in the front yard, parties all night long, probably getting cars prowled in your neighborhood. You know the house, okay? The drug units would take these drug offenders, give them some money, and they'd go into that house and make a drug buy. When they made enough of them, the drug units would serve a search warrant on that house, make the arrests, get the drugs, get the guns, shut the house down. Your neighborhood would be quiet again for a while. Well, because we don't have these drug offenders anymore, because no one's getting arrested for drug possession, these houses are flourishing in your neighborhoods. Because we don't have that bottom level person anymore, because no one's getting arrested for drug possession. And so I talk to these neighbors all the time, and this is what I explain to them. And nothing's being done in the legislature to combat this right now. And that's where we're at this point. So what's happening is you're getting frustrated, okay, because you have this house in your neighborhood, and we all know it when we see it. And we can, in uniform, there's not much we can do. We can go knock on their door and tell them to knock it off. We might be able to, arrest somebody with a warrant that's coming out of the house or something like that. But really, because of this Blake decision, our hands are tied in a lot of circumstances, in a lot of ways regarding this sort of thing. So what we really encourage you to do is write to your legislators and tell them, we got to get this fixed. We got to do something to fix this. And what we really want is people to get into treatment. We want to make treatment the priority. We want to have a law that focuses on treatment to get these people off this stuff. We want these success stories. I want to see a lot more of these success stories, because those folks are my heroes. And that, I think, is the ultimate goal here. Yes, sir. Narcan, you've all heard of that? Yeah. Noxolone, it's a miracle. It's used on a daily basis downtown. We have a big problem downtown on Martin Luther King Way. There's a homeless population down there, and Narcan it's a miracle. When someone is under the influence of opioids and they overdose, the Narcan, maybe even one spray in their nose can revive them. And it's used on a daily basis down there. Most officers carry it in their car. But what really helps is that a lot of the users down there have it with them, and they're the ones who save a lot of lives down there. So it is truly a miracle. It's saving lives. It truly is. Yeah, as far as I know, it's not a prescription, so it's a lifesaver.
You can even go to some drugstores and pharmacies and ask for it, and they'll give it to you. Just hand it.
Sorry about that, but that would be the state legislature working with the governor's office and potential federal agencies for additional funding on that. But the bulk of that's basically going to be on the legislature and the governor's office to iron out a package and redo that late 70s consolidation of Western State, essentially.
And that also means it's us asking our politicians to do that.
That's right, and who are they accountable to? It's,
Glamorous thing to ask for. I understand. It's not glamorous to ask for kind of money. So, I mean, what can we do to help with that? Get the money for that.
oh, well,
Yeah, I think that's a big surprise to most people, how you scratch the surface. There's really just not a lot of resources. We did a video on the Blake decision and the potential for a new law, and it's a 7-minute video that's on our sheriff's Facebook. And I'd invite you, if you had 7 minutes, to take a look. But you'll see people who are advocates that Jeff talked about, who talk about, yeah, sometimes it is jail that helped us get into treatment. But it's just really tough. I mean, it's just, there's just not a lot of resources out there. And, there was a lot of talk over George Floyd about defunding the police and, not really here. And that meant a couple of different things to different people. One, it meant we don't want the police, which I never heard here. But it also meant sometimes, well, we don't want to give money to the police. We want to give it to social services or programs that help people other than police and jail. And my answer to that is, unfortunately, the answer is a horrible one. It's no, it's an expensive fix. You need all the pieces to work together to have a good system. You have to have police. You have to have strong courts. You have to have, public defenders that don't carry 80 cases. You need all this stuff, and it's an expensive fix. But yeah, right now I know there's people who want to get into treatment out there in a homeless encampments, but they can't. They're just waiting. Same with mental health problems. I mean, sometimes our mental health people have to place people in Spokane in beds way across the state to get them into treatment. It's just unfortunate.
I think this will be the last
Yeah,
questions.
No,
No, that's
not a question. I just want to make a statement so everyone hears that Salvation Army loves BPD and the Sheriff's Department. They work with us all the time, and when we call and they're able to come, they do come. And we appreciate the constraints that they're facing in doing their jobs and the challenges that the community poses to them and everybody else that's trying to do business in the community. And I just wanted to make sure that that was clear in my earlier statement. That was not misunderstood. We're big fans. Okay.
One thing, we are big fans of Salvation Army, but they just closed the only drop-in homeless shelter here in Kitsap County.
Yeah, and I'm sorry about that. We could talk to the county about that.
There's so much to say on this. It's what I come away with is that the needs are so great, and so much of the social services have been put onto the law enforcement or the law defenders or the people defenders. But also, we've got to realize that there's underlying causes for why is more and more drugs being used. In other words, what's that all about? And how is it getting into the country? And sometimes they say, who's making the money off of that? Yes, this will be the very last then.
Thank you, Jill, for saying that, because I think it comes back to prevention. And it comes back to how we treat our babies from the birth. And I serve on the county's community advisory board for Nurse Family Partnership, a program where specially trained nurses mentor and help pregnant women with their first-time low-income pregnant women with their babies till they're 2 years old. And that program has proven to reduce the arrest and incarceration of juveniles and their mothers over time. And one of the people on the Community Advisory Board is Sheriff Joe Knoll from Jefferson County, and he currently is chair of the advisory board. So I encourage you folks to think about finding someone who could serve on that advisory board too with me, so we can all work together on the prevention end. Thank you.
And that's a longer-term convention. I mean, longer-term solution.
It's over 2 years.
Well, I'm going to say thank you very, very much to the three panelists. Yeah. And now go enjoy your sunshine.
And if you're here on your day off, thank you.
I'll tell you, really, I want to say really, thank you. You did such a nice thing. We just scratched the surface, though, didn't we?
They're great topics.
I would have.